Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Exodus chapter 7 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We are picking up the story at a moment of extreme tension. If you've been following the narrative, you know that Moses and Aaron have previously approached Pharaoh, the absolute and unchallenged ruler of Egypt, and, well, they got completely rebuffed. Not only did Pharaoh say no to letting the people go, but he actually punished them, increasing the physical labor and the suffering of the enslaved Israelites. So right now, the people are broken, Moses is actively questioning his own ability to speak, and the Egyptian empire looks completely invincible. Now the stage is set for a massive, unyielding confrontation. God is stepping in directly to escalate the situation, and he's about to show Egypt a level of power, authority, and consequence that the ancient world has literally never witnessed before.
So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The Divine Commission. 2. The Sign of the Snake. 3. The Nile turns to blood. 4. Pharaoh's stubborn heart. 5. Key ideas and lessons. And finally, 6. Summary and conclusion.
All right, let's dive into part 1, the Divine Commission, covering verses 1 through 7.
God tells Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet." Now, to really grasp what's happening here, we need to look at the original Hebrew text. The word used for God in this verse is Elohim. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean Moses is suddenly a literal divine being. In biblical Hebrew, Elohim can also mean a supreme judge, a ruler, or an ultimate authoritative figure. So God is essentially telling Moses, look, when you walk into that throne room, you're not walking in as some stuttering shepherd. You're walking in with my full authority. You hold the gavel. Pharaoh viewed himself as a living God, but God is establishing right out of the gate that Moses is going to stand over him with true divine backing. And because Moses struggled with speaking, Aaron is appointed to be his Navi, his prophet, or his mouthpiece.
Notice how brilliantly this establishes a perfect chain of command before they ever step foot back into the royal court. God gives the absolute command to Moses. Moses, acting as the Elohim, the authoritative judge in this scenario, passes the exact command to his brother Aaron. And then Aaron, acting as the prophet or spokesperson, delivers the message out loud to Pharaoh. It is a perfectly ordered, airtight system of communication. Moses holds the authority, but Aaron does the physical talking. They're operating as a unified front, totally equipped for the negotiation of a lifetime.
Moving to verses 3 and 4, God gives Moses a crystal clear prophecy about exactly what's going to happen next. There are going to be no surprises here. God says he will harden Pharaoh's heart, and because of this, Pharaoh will absolutely refuse to listen. But God explains that this resistance is actually going to lead to something incredible, the multiplying of signs and wonders. The Hebrew words here are otot and mophetem. We're not talking about parlor tricks. These are massive, undeniable proofs of divine jurisdiction. The goal is laid out so plainly in verse 5, so that the Egyptians will ultimately know exactly who the Lord is.
We really need to clarify what a hardened heart actually means, because it is absolutely central to this whole chapter. It's not a physical or medical condition. In Hebrew, the words often used for hardening the heart in this narrative imply making it heavy, kaved, or making it stiff and hard, kashah. It represents a state of extreme heavy stubbornness. It's this unyielding, rigid arrogance where a person's pride completely blinds them to the reality right in front of their face. Pharaoh is going to be presented with undeniable, logical evidence of a higher power, and he's going to refuse to yield simply out of sheer heavy pride.
Before we get to the physical action, verses 6 and 7 drop a really fascinating historical detail. It simply states that Moses and Aaron did exactly as the Lord commanded them. And how old were they when they took on the most powerful, intimidating empire in the ancient world? Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83. Sure, in the ancient world, advanced age commanded respect, but it also really highlights the pure vulnerability of the situation. These are not young, strapping warriors leading an armed rebellion. We are looking at two elderly brothers armed with nothing but a wooden walking stick and absolute obedience to God, stepping right into a highly dangerous political and spiritual battle.
Part 2, the Sign of the Snake. Let's see what happens in verses 8 through 13.
Moses and Aaron enter Pharaoh's court. God had already prepared them for this exact moment. He literally told them that Pharaoh would inevitably ask them to prove themselves by performing a miracle, some sign of their authority. So God's instruction was incredibly simple. Tell Aaron to take his staff, his everyday wooden walking stick, and throw it onto the marble floor in front of Pharaoh. The text says it will become a snake. But the Hebrew word used here is super fascinating, tanin. This isn't just some little garden snake. Tanin often translates to a sea monster, a large reptile, or even a crocodile. It was a terrifying, formidable creature. You have to remember the cobra and the crocodile were actual symbols of Egyptian royal power. So by throwing down a staff that transforms into a tanin right in the middle of the throne room, Moses and Aaron are directly challenging the symbol of Pharaoh's own crown.
It's the ultimate mic drop. But Pharaoh's not easily impressed. He summons his wise men and his sorcerers. Using their secret occult arts, the Egyptian magicians throw down their own staffs, and they also become serpents. So it seems like a tie, right? A total battle of magic. But the text gives us the plain, undeniable truth of what happens next. Aaron's single staff swallows up all the staffs of the Egyptian magicians. Notice the literal phrasing there. It doesn't just say Aaron's snake swallowed their snakes, it says Aaron's staff swallowed their staffs. God's power literally eats their magic tricks for breakfast. It's a total demonstration of absolute divine supremacy. Yet, true to God's prophecy, Pharaoh's heart remains heavy and hard, and he refuses to listen.
Moving right along to part 3, the Nile turns to blood. This covers verses 14 through 21.
Because Pharaoh refused to listen to that first warning sign in the throne room, God escalates the situation. He gives Moses very specific, step-by-step instructions for the first actual plague. First, go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes down to the water, and wait for him on the bank of the Nile River. Why the morning? Well, historians and scholars note that Pharaoh likely went to the Nile early in the morning for religious rituals or to bathe, because the Nile was actually worshipped as a god itself, known as Hapi. So Moses is intercepting Pharaoh at his most sacred space. Second, take the staff, confront him, and directly demand the release of the Israelites. And third, warn him that the water will be struck.
The scale of this judgment is just absolute and terrifying. God tells Moses to have Aaron stretch his staff out not just over the Nile River, but over all the waters of Egypt, the streams, the man-made canals, the ponds, the reservoirs, every single body of water. The Hebrew word here is dam, which means blood. And the text specifically notes a really chilling detail. The blood will be everywhere, even in the wooden buckets and stone jars inside people's private homes. Just imagine the absolute terror of waking up, drawing a bucket of water from your household well, or pouring from a stone jar in your kitchen and pulling up thick, red blood. There was absolutely no escaping it.
The original Hebrew tells us simply and powerfully, Moses and Aaron did exactly as the Lord commanded. Right there on the riverbank, in the direct sight of Pharaoh and all his royal servants, Aaron lifted up the wooden rod and struck the waters of the mighty river. The execution of this was entirely public. It wasn't some trick done in the shadows. It was undeniable, happening right in front of the ruler's eyes, and the results were immediate and devastating.
Think about the sheer ecological disaster here. The Nile wasn't just a scenic river. It was the absolute lifeblood of ancient Egypt. It provided their drinking water, it irrigated their crops, it was their highway for commerce, and it was a primary food source. When the water turned to blood, the plain text tells us the exact consequences. The fish immediately died. The river began to severely stink, filling the air with the smell of decay. It became totally undrinkable. In a single moment, a mighty nation's primary source of life was completely ruined.
Part 4. Pharaoh's stubborn heart. Let's look at verses 22 through 25 to see the aftermath.
So you have to ask yourself, how does a leader react to his entire nation's water supply being completely ruined? You would really think that when your country has absolutely no drinking water, when dead fish are rotting in your sacred river, and when literal blood is sitting in the stone jars in your citizens' kitchens, you would immediately summon Moses. You would think a king would yield to save his people from dying of thirst.
But he doesn't. And this is where the tragic irony completely peaks. Once again, the Egyptian magicians use their secret arts to mimic the plague. Think about how foolish that is. They don't reverse the plague, they just make more blood. They only add to the disaster just to prove they can do a magic trick. And because of this, Pharaoh's heart remains heavy and hard. The text says he literally turned his back, went into his house, and didn't take any of it to heart. He retreated to his comfortable palace, completely ignoring the suffering. Meanwhile, the text uses the Hebrew word hapar, meaning the regular Egyptian people were forced to frantically dig in the dirt along the banks of the Nile, desperately trying to find a trickle of ground-filtered drinking water just to survive. The disparity of leadership here is just staggering.
The chapter concludes with a simple, stark, chronological note. Exactly 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Why 7 days? This shows us that God isn't just rapidly firing off magic tricks one after another. He is giving Egypt, and specifically Pharaoh, a full week of consequences, a full week of dead fish, a full week of digging in the dirt for water, a full week of time to reflect, to realize who is truly in charge, and to yield. But for an entire week, the nation suffered under this judgment while their leaders sat stubbornly inside his palace walls.
Part 5.
Key ideas and lessons. Let's talk about the practical takeaways from everything we just discussed.
What can we actually learn from this ancient text for our own lives today? Well, first, listen to warnings. Pharaoh was shown the sign of the snake right in his throne room, but chose to ignore it. Ignoring a clear warning often invites a much larger disaster. Second, do not let pride blind you to reality. Pharaoh's hardened, heavy heart didn't just hurt him, it hurt everyone under his care. A good leader faces reality rather than retreating to a comfortable palace while others suffer. Third, look at Moses and Aaron. They found absolute success by simply following God's step-by-step instructions. They didn't overcomplicate it. And finally, true authority cannot be counterfeited. The magicians could mimic the snake and they could mimic the blood, but Aaron's staff swallowed theirs. Divine power will always overrule human trickery and manipulation.
Part 6, Summary and Conclusion. Let's do a quick recap to tie it all together.
If you remember only 4 things from this chapter, remember this sequence. First, God commissions Moses with the authority of Elohim and Aaron as his prophet. Second, they boldly confront Pharaoh, and Aaron's staff miraculously consumes the staffs of the Egyptian magicians, proving God's dominance. Third, when Pharaoh refuses to listen, Moses and Aaron strike the Nile, turning all the water in Egypt into literal blood, causing massive ecological devastation. And fourth, through a full 7 days of a ruined nation, Pharaoh stubbornly retreats to his palace, refusing to yield his heavy pride.
I want to leave you with a question to deeply ponder based on Pharaoh's tragic flaw. Are you letting a hardened heart, your own stubbornness, your own heavy pride, keep you from seeing the obvious truths or acknowledging reality in your own life? Think about that. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.